Glory to Jesus Christ, and welcome to this week's episode of God with Us Live. Every week, we're joined by men and women, monastics, clergy, and laity, exploring exciting and inspiring ways to live our Eastern Catholic faith today. Your host is Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, a husband, father, and deacon of the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of St. Nicholas. And now, here's Father Deacon Nick.
Hello and welcome once again, God with Us Live listeners. Your host, Father Deacon Nick, pleased as always to be here with you to share more about our beautiful Eastern Catholic churches and what's going on in them. Our guest today is a name that's familiar to you, and he's already been a guest on God with Us Live. Jack Figel, he's the owner of Eastern Christian Publications, involved in a lot of other things as well, also involved here at God with Us. Jack's involved in a lot of great things, but in this case, we're going to be speaking to him specifically about a book that Eastern Christian Publications recently published, which makes sense for a publishing institution. And Jack's going to tell us about it. Real excited to share about this book, especially because it is about a topic that it has become very timely with a lot of the unrest in the Holy Land over the past few months. It's a lot of people have had to cancel pilgrimages there, rethink plans to visit the Holy Land, and so this book, which is about a pilgrimage to the Holy Land within the past few years, will hopefully serve as kind of a pilgrimage in its own right through this book. And we'll talk more about it instead of speaking about it in vague terms. So, Jack, a lot of people are familiar with you. Again, you've been on the show, so we don't really need to spend a lot of time on introductions. If people need to be introduced, they can go back to our previous episode and listen to about 40 minutes of an introduction about who Jack Figel is and everything he's involved in. But welcome to the show once again, Jack.
Thanks, Father Deacon. It's great to be back. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever. So first of all, I guess before we get to the book specifically, I thought we'd kind of talk about pilgrimages in general. You know, some people have been on pilgrimages. Some people are kind of curious, is this something that would appeal to me? So I thought I'd start off by asking you in the first place, what kind of appealed to you about going on pilgrimages on a personal level? Why did you decide to go on maybe your first pilgrimage and continue to do it?
Actually, it's a very, very good question. I think people need to think that a pilgrimage is not a vacation. It's not a tour. It's a spiritual experience. At least it should be. And the one we're going to speak about in a little more detail here in a few minutes was this past summer to Constantinople, current-day Istanbul, and to the Holy Land. And there were some very unique and special things that happened that we'll talk about. But you asked the question, my first pilgrimage actually was some 25 years ago when I went on a pilgrimage with a dear friend of mine for many, many years in the ecumenical world, Archbishop Vsevolod of Skopelos, of blessed memory, who was a Ukrainian Orthodox Archbishop and head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in America at the time in the 90s, before they merged with what was then the Schismatic group based in Bound Brook, New Jersey, and merged together under the Ecumenical Patriarch. Archbishop Vsevolod was instrumental in that merger taking place, and he and I became friends in the early 90s when I published and reprinted the Liturgicon or Služebnik of St. Peter Mohila of 1639. It was a large book that I reprinted, and he and I got to be very, very close from that, and we traveled together on a couple of occasions. And in 1999, we made arrangements to have a private audience with then Pope John Paul II, and made a trip down to Bari, Italy, and then, of course, to Rome. And so that was a pilgrimage to visit the sites of St. Nicholas and St. Peter. And ever since 1999, every couple of years, I've done either individual pilgrimages, for instance, to Slovakia and Western Ukraine to Transcarpathia, the home of the Byzantine Catholic Ruthenian Church. I was there for Pascha in 2004. In 2007, I was there for the Christmas holidays in January. They were on the old calendar back then. I also was involved with them doing concert tours. So you could say the 3 to 4 weeks that we did concert tours here in America with the seminary choir was a bit of a pilgrimage. We went from church to church singing concerts. And then in 2014, so 10 years ago, Viking Travel, the folks that do the riverboats and big ocean liners, contacted me from their Chicago office that does faith-based pilgrimage custom design. And Father Thomas Loya put them in touch with me. They wanted to do an ecumenical pilgrimage of Catholics and Orthodox to both Rome and Istanbul. And Father Tom told them they should contact me because I had the connections. And so in 2014, we did a 2-week trip with 40 people to Istanbul and Rome. We had a private audience with Patriarch Bartholomew and a private audience with Pope Francis, just the 40 of us. And we've done 3 other ecumenical pilgrimages since then. And the last one was this past summer, where we went to Istanbul and the Holy Land. So that's how I got interested. And those are the pilgrimages, most of them. There have been a few others, but those are the pilgrimages I've done over the last 25 years.
So you mentioned kind of your first one was an ecumenical pilgrimage with Bishop Vsevolod. Could you talk a little bit more about that? An ecumenical pilgrimage that involves both Catholic and Orthodox. Why you've kind of continued in that theme? Why you think that's something that's important to continue? Obviously, you're involved with the Orientale Lumen Foundation, and ecumenical work is a big part of that. But especially pilgrimages as an ecumenical group. Could you kind of speak about why that's an important sort of thing to carry forward?
Sure. Yeah, it's important because many of the sites that people go on pilgrimage to are recognized by both Catholics and Orthodox. So, for instance, Orthodox, certainly recognize the See of Peter and all of the sites in Rome as important in the Orthodox Church's life. And likewise, many of the sites in Constantinople, especially for us Eastern Catholics, are important to the church history of us. The oral tradition, I don't think there's evidence, but the oral tradition that Christianity came to the Slavic people through St. Cyril Methodius in the 9th century. They started in Constantinople and were sent by the then Archbishop of Constantinople to Christianize the Slavic people at the request of the great Prince of Moravia. And on their way to Moravia, they stopped off in the Carpathian Mountains. I think the stories I've heard is they stopped for the winter on their way, and they taught the gospel of Christ to the indigenous people they found in the Carpathian Mountains. So these sites are common to Catholics and Orthodox. The saints that you can visit the relics and pray at their relics are of both churches. And so I find it important that we go to these sites together as a group. And by going together as a group, we break down the barriers that stand between our churches. We find the common ground. We find common prayer is one of the hallmarks of these trips that I plan, in that we focus more on non-Eucharistic services that we can pray together. On this last trip over the summer, we had an Orthodox priest and a Eastern Catholic bishop and another Eastern Catholic priest, and we had them all leading different services in different places. And we only had 2 Eucharists on a 2-week trip. A lot of Roman Catholic pilgrimages, they have Mass every morning. We try to do non-Eucharistic so that everyone can participate, and we can have different leaders, different ministers leading the services. And it, I think, just reinforces the idea that we're all one church. There is only one Church of Christ, and we're all members of it. And by going together to these sites, we get to pray together. We get to learn more from each other and learn more about our faith itself.
Yeah, I had wondered about the kind of logistical issue there of not being able necessarily to share in the Eucharist together, but that makes a lot of sense to focus on the services from the Orologian, right, and other services that we can share together, that we can celebrate together without any kind of separation or distinction, really, because we we do pray basically the same prayers, right? It's just the Eucharist where unfortunately we're not able to fully share communion at that service, at that the Divine Liturgy yet. Um, but that kind of gets to another issue, which you spoke about, as I mentioned, logistics, right? The logistics of planning for a group of Catholic and Orthodox that, as we were just saying, can't celebrate the Eucharist together, but can celebrate other services together. But what other logistics are involved in planning a pilgrimage? I've always wondered that. Is it something where you just, kind of contact a company and say, I want to go to A, B, and C, or is it a lot more footwork and calling around and and what kind of goes on in the background, if you wouldn't mind pulling the curtain back a little bit?
Sure. Well, it all depends. I've done the full range where the initial part is sort of maybe 18 months before a given trip. I get inspired to have an idea to go someplace and to do something. Or in the case of that first one with the the notion when Viking contacted me and said, we'd like to do this and we want you to help us. That one and the one we did this last summer that Viking Travel participated in, they handle a lot of the behind the scenes logistics. I do sort of the high level planning of picking dates. I put together the itinerary of where we go on what day, what flights we get that would be the most efficient for travel purposes. I recommend to them the hotels because I've been to these places before, of which ones I want to stay at, what's convenient, where we can have easy access for the pilgrims to be able to walk about a little bit, but also have access to the bus to pick us up and take us around. And so in the case of the Viking trips, they handle all those logistics once I tell them what we want. They arrange for the schedule at a detail level. They arrange for the tour guides, the bus transportation. They book the flights. They get group ticket discounts for us. And then everyone pays Viking for their trip. And Viking provides one or two complimentary seats, depending on how many people we get to sign up for the trip. So a tour director and a spiritual director are then able to participate in that trip. So there's, if Viking's involved, it's relatively easy. I just do the itinerary, but then I'm the one that has the contact. So I'm the one who requests and schedules the private audiences and any other things that we need to that are church related or hierarchy related. And then Viking does all the groundwork. I have done one or two of these ecumenical pilgrimages without Viking, where we didn't have enough people to justify them and their overhead. And so I've done them all myself. It's a lot of work. The second ecumenical pilgrimage, we went to Rome, had a private audience with Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square. There was only 10 of us. And instead of going to Turkey, that time there was a coup going on, so it was not safe. We rented vans and drove ourselves from Rome down through Naples, all the way to Bari, and then up along the eastern coast of Italy, the Byzantine coast, if you will, all the way up to Ravenna, overnight in Ravenna, saw all the mosaics, and then back through the mountains to the airport to fly home. So on that one, I booked the hotels, I booked the vans, I scheduled all the meals, I scheduled all the meetings, places to go, and for that one, like I said, I did everything. It's cheaper that way, but it's a lot more work.
I can imagine that that being a lot more work. But like you said, and I hadn't thought about that before, that even though Viking might arrange for the logistics of travel and lodging and things like that, in the end, all of the church related things is something that that falls to you because you have the context. You're going to understand that a little better than someone who, yes, understands the business of traveling, right, but not necessarily the religious side of things. So thank you for
Yeah,
sharing all that.
yeah, especially things like what prayer services to do where.
Right.
Viking has no clue about that, and so I put together a liturgical book that everyone gets. I also make up a an icon that we travel with. Everyone gets a mounted copy of an icon that's particular to that pilgrimage that they then can take on travel with them. And when they come home, now they have an icon to remember the trip by.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So for some of the people listening, they might hear all these things about staying in different hotels, traveling around, all this sort of thing, and thinking, well, is it really worth it? Is it really worth all that fuss traveling overseas, things like that? Not to mention the expense obviously associated with it. What would you say to someone who says, well, I can just watch a travel log video on TV about it. I can read a book. I can just look at pictures, and that's good enough for me. What would you say is the benefit of actually physically going to these places?
Well, I think there's two huge benefits that you just can't get from watching videos or reading a book. The first one I think is the most important, and that is especially in the Holy Land, where you get to walk in the places where Jesus walked. And you get to visualize the stories of Scripture that we hear on Sundays in church in a totally different way than you ever have in your life. I went there for the first time just 4 years ago, and again this past summer, and both times I just was astounded at how much more understanding I had of Scripture and of the message of the gospel having been there. Just in fact, that the tour guide this past summer said that his explanation of things was going to be more than just facts and figures and things about the places we visit. He said he was going to try to give us a notion of the fifth gospel, which was the geography of the Holy Land. And that was so important because my first trip, I didn't realize how far it is from Galilee to Jerusalem. And when we see a one-liner in Scripture that says, Jesus and the disciples went to Jerusalem, that's a bit of a trip. And especially back in his day when they had to walk it. It took us 3 or 4 hours by bus to get from Galilee to Jerusalem down along the Jordan River. And I just never had an appreciation for how far away it was. The other part of that was that Jerusalem is literally built on hills. There's hardly any street or walkway that's flat. Everything is either steps or slanted. And so those things that you read about, you can't visualize until you actually experience it. And the other is the notion of praying in close proximity to where things happen. And I just mentioned one of many that we've done on the 2 trips to the Holy Land, and that is there are many small chapels around the tomb of Christ in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's actually a church within a church, and I never knew that until I got there and saw that there's a small church called the Ecumenical, which covers the tomb and is only big enough for about 5 or 10 people at a time. And then there's a basilica that the main dome encompasses the small church. And about 50 feet all around from that small church, because it is so small, are all these chapels. The Armenians have one, the Greek Orthodox have one, a few other Eastern churches, and then the Roman Catholics have one that is run by the Franciscans. And so you schedule with those groups a prayer time in their chapel. And what I found was because they said, you only get a 45-minute time slot because we're so busy, and you have to book those months and months in advance. I said, well, we can't do our mass, in 45 minutes the way the Romans can. We need more time, so you can't have more time. So I talked to the spiritual director, and they said, well, Eucharist is important, but we have such a wealth of prayer services in the Eastern Church. Find something else that would be appropriate. So believe it or not, I pulled down a book I have. It's a book of Akathis, published by the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, Jordanville, New York. And in there, I looked up the table of contents. There's actually an Akathis to the tomb of Christ.
Wow, how perfect.
We know of Akathis to Nicholas and Akathis to Jesus, Akathis to Mary being the most popular. But I discovered this one. It's an Akathis to the tomb itself. And the poetry is like the poetry we see in any Akathis, but it's all about the tomb and the role that the tomb of Christ plays in resurrection. And it was perfect. It was more perfect than a mass because we stood in the chapel and chanted, because we could apply our musical chant to the text that was there, and chanted for 40 minutes all these phrases in which we were praying to the tomb that was just, right next door.
Wow, yeah, how absolutely perfect, and one of those moments of God's providence, right? You never would have thought of that till even look in the book, right? If it hadn't been the little hurdle there in trying to figure out how to plan a service there. So that's just so cool, cool.
Yeah. It was, like I said, it was a highlight of the trip, and now I have that text. I had to edit it, to make it sort of modern English, but now we have it, and it's something that I discovered myself, for the first time just 4 years ago.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a short break here to listen to our Saint of the Week. When we get back, we'll talk more specifically about the book, about this most recent pilgrimage to Constantinople and the Holy Land, called That They May All Be One, Stories from an Ecumenical Pilgrimage by Sophia Martin. That's the pen name of the author there. So stay tuned with us here on God With Us Live.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Do you know which saint loved deer so much that he almost lost his hands? Saint Anthony of Martkopi came to the Kingdom of Georgia in the 6th century to spread the gospel. He, along with 12 other monastic missionaries from Mesopotamia, went on to found monasteries and convert many Georgians to the faith. For his part, Saint Anthony preached in the region of Kakheti, always carrying with him an icon of the miraculous image of Christ, not made with hands, delivered by St. Jude to King Abgar. When he was not preaching, St. Anthony retreated to the wilderness. Every night as the sun began to set, deer would visit St. Anthony so that he could milk them for sustenance. One day, the deer arrived much sooner than usual, followed by a wounded fawn. Wanting to return the kindness the deer had shown to him, St. Anthony followed the herd of deer as they retraced the tracks of the young fawn. Suddenly they came into a clearing and saw a nobleman hunting. The nobleman, a pagan, was startled by the sight of the old monk clutching his icon and surrounded by a herd of deer. Fearing what this strange man might decide to do, the nobleman ordered his servants to cut off Anthony's hands. The servants took him away, and when one of them tried to do so, he fell to the ground, unable to speak. St. Anthony, showing his love for all people, even those who might try to hurt him, simply made the sign of the cross over the man, healing him instantly. Once word of this miracle reached the nobleman, he recognized Anthony's holiness at once, and he promised the man of God anything he would need. St. Anthony's request? A piece of salt. Wanting to honor the saint, the nobleman ordered 2 large blocks of salt to be brought to St. Anthony. The humble monk simply broke off a small piece from one of the blocks and carefully placed it near his cell in the wilderness for his good friends, the deer. As news of the miracle spread, many people came to visit St. Anthony, leading him to found a monastery. Yearning to escape the growing crowds, though, St. Anthony moved to the top of a nearby mountain where he lived on top of a pillar preaching the gospel of Christ for the last 15 years of his life. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Join us again next time when we learn more about the lives of these holy men and women.
And welcome back, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick, excited to be here with you as always, speaking with Jack Figel, talking about pilgrimages in the first half of the show, and now we're going to kind of move on to a book recently published by Eastern Christian Publications about a specific pilgrimage that happened this past summer. And the author of the book, there's a few interesting details about her, how she, decided to go on this pilgrimage, and then after going on the pilgrimage, decided to kind of put her thoughts down into a form that could become a book. So, could you tell us a little bit about who wrote this book and how she kind of decided to go on the pilgrimage, how she decided to kind of turn it into a book, how all those sorts of things happened?
Yeah, sure. What's interesting to start with is that she starts the book by telling us that she had her 17th birthday the day we left. So she is only 17 years old. And her parents were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary in 2023, last year. And they saw our pilgrimage announcement. And so the whole family decided for the anniversary that they were going to go on this pilgrimage with our group. Now, when I announce these pilgrimages, they go out to the public. They're open to anyone who wants to join. And this one, we had 20 people going, which is a nice group where everyone gets to know each other. So there's a risk with that, and that is if some people don't get along, you can't sort of hide. But if everyone gets along, you really have an enhanced experience. And we were blessed that everyone got along. But half the people that sign up for these pilgrimages, these kinds of trips, I don't know. I don't know who's coming. And so we had this family of 4 people signed up. They live in, I think, Brooklyn. And they signed up. Was the 17-year-old daughter, her 19-year-old brother, and the 2 parents. And they all signed up, and I, was curious, but I, didn't want to ask too many questions or anything. So we met for the first time at Dulles Airport the day we were leaving. And they were just a family full of love. And they just, exuded a spirituality that the rest of us sort of picked up on. So it was amazing. The other thing I'll say about the group is that we had 20 people, 2 of whom were Orthodox, a priest and his son. Everyone else, in terms of the principles, were Eastern Catholic from all 4 different ethnic churches. So we had Amalkites, we had Ruthenians, Ukrainians, and a Romanian. So all of the churches, Eastern Catholic churches, represented. And then several of those Eastern Catholics had Roman Catholic spouses. And so we did have the Roman Catholics present. But again, like I mentioned in the audience with Patriarch Bartholomew at one time, the Eastern Catholics were in the majority, which is rare for any sort of gathering of people. And so this family came along on the trip. The 2 kids were very, very, very bright. I think their parents are both university professors. And when we finished the day, that the kids were the ones who were able to walk and go everywhere. I wasn't. I missed half the thing because I just couldn't walk that much. They would get back on the bus and we'd be heading back to the hotel. And the tour guide would say, "Now, where did we go this morning, and what did we see?" And he would sort of like at the end of a day, the teacher asking questions of the class. What did we learn today, class? And every single question the tour guide asked, these kids had the answer. They're the ones who paid attention the most. They were, engaged in everything, and it was just they were an inspiration to the rest of us in terms of experiencing the trip. The way the book came about was towards the end of the trip, one or two of the other pilgrims came to me and said, Jack, this trip has just been so fantastic. We should collect everyone's pictures, and you should put them in a book for us. So we talked some more, and I said, well, I'm a book publisher. I happen to know how to get books made. So yeah, I could probably do that. And then we talked to this family, and the daughter said, she's only 17, and to show how smart she is, she was entering college as a freshman this past fall at 17. And the first class she was going to have was English, and she already knew one of her assignments for the semester was to write a book. And so it seemed like a perfect connection. We suggested, well, Sophie, why don't you write your book about our trip, and then I'll publish it with the pictures as kind of like, a travelogue, a pilgrimage book. So that's how the book idea came about. She agreed. And so what she wrote for her class turned out to be the stories of the text of the book, and then all the pictures that she took and mostly her mother took are in the book as well. So the book is some 280 pages with over 300 full-color pictures from the entire trip. And she goes through the trip day by day, saying what we did, where we went. So it's kind of like a well-annotated photo album of the trip. You get to see all the sights, and you get to read her spiritual impressions of those places. The difference with this book now, as you sort of alluded to, Father Deacon, is that the Holy Land, I think, is now today too dangerous and will be for some period of time for Westerners to visit. I don't know numbers or anything in how tourism is these days, but I'm fearful that the conflicts that are going on in the Middle East are not going to get resolved soon. And so in this book, we have documented what the Holy Land was like last summer before all of this happened. And I'll also just mention one little piece, and that is when I started planning this pilgrimage 2 years ago, I actually surveyed my customer base and asked, should we go in July when it's hot but not very crowded, or should we go in October when it's cooler but there are long lines? And the answers came back half and half. Half thought it was better to go when it was cooler, despite the lines, and the other half thought it's better to go when it's not so crowded, even though it's hot. And I didn't know which way to go. So I prayed on it, and I was inspired by the Holy Spirit to pick July, because if I picked October, we could have been there, most likely would have been there, when the war broke out. And we could have been stuck there for who knows how long.
Yeah, absolutely. Yet another instance, right, of the Holy Spirit guiding you to
Yep.
these
Yep.
decisions you never could have made on your own.
No, that's right. That's right. And I frequently just stop, don't make a decision or don't do anything until I get that phone call.
So, as someone who's been on this pilgrimage, and obviously, as you mentioned, this book, if nothing else, kind of documents what the Holy Land was like before all of this started happening. Uh, but as someone who's been to the Holy Land several times, right, as someone who was on this specific pilgrimage, um, reading through this book, going through the process of putting it together for publication, everything like that. Um, What did you get out of the book? I mean, did reading through Sophia's reflections kind of add to your experience of that pilgrimage, or make you look at it in a new light?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I was not able to walk to all the sites, so after lunch, I usually just stayed on the bus, and the group went off and did a couple more sightseeing things before we went back to the hotel. So, and some of those I'd been to before. I missed them this time, so I didn't hear this tour guide's explanation of things and that sort of thing. But the group that was there, just in interacting with them, and in particular Sophia and her family, created a whole different kind of a view, and she puts it in this book. And I mean, I agree with all that I'm just now going to read to you. And this is the foreword that Bishop John Michael Botein wrote when he read the book, because he was our spiritual director on the trip.
And he's the bishop for Romanian Catholics here in the United States, in case any of our listeners might not be familiar with the name. Probably familiar, but just in case people aren't familiar.
That's right. And now, because he's been bishop, I think, 30 years, he's one of the senior, in terms of ordination and consecration, one of the most senior Catholic bishops in the whole country, as being a bishop for 30 years. So he graciously wrote the foreword for her book after I sent him the draft and the text. And if I may, I'd just like to read a couple of paragraphs from his foreword, because it explains my feelings even better, and it goes to show you what the bishop found in this book. He talks about not wanting to go to the Holy Land because he wasn't sure about what he was going to get out of it, and now that he's gone, he was glad. And he starts to talk about Istanbul and our visit there first. But then he goes on. Likewise, until this pilgrimage, I did not know what I was missing, not having visited the sites where our Lord lived, worked, died, and rose. There is a world of experience available to one who journeys with the eyes of faith open to such places as these. Now that I have been there, I, like many pilgrims, found the Bible come to life in new ways. But I still didn't know what I was missing, even during my pilgrimage, until I read the book you are reading now. To be sure, this book will bring back powerful memories in all of us who journeyed with Sophia. But it will do more than that. I did not realize how many details escaped my notice at many of the sites until Sophia's careful cataloging of them here brought them to my attention. Her rendering of the events of those days showed me, to my chagrin, what I had not been paying attention to, what I had been missing. By this I mean more than the physical details of the places themselves. Her profound appreciation of each place from the point of view of her deep spirituality made me wonder if I had really been on the same trip. To read this book is to be given the privilege of seeing the events and places of those days through the eyes of a true witness, of someone who gives voice to the meaning of her experiences as few of us can. The journey Sophia describes here goes far beyond the places we visited, into the depths of Sophia's love of God and the Church, of her intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, and into her own unique, amazing story. I think that says it all for me. I agree 1,000% with what the bishop wrote, that Sophia's book has so many more details that I missed, I didn't even know about. And in fact, there's half a dozen occasions that she wrote a story about some coincidence or something that happened on the trip, that she comments that says, Jack must have planned this very, very well. And then I wrote back to her as I was reviewing the manuscript, no, Sophia, the Holy Spirit did that. I had nothing to do with it. There were so many coincidences that occurred that it was, I mean, for instance, the day we went to Cana And we had a little ceremony where all the couples renewed their marriage vows, and Bishop John Michael blessed their marriage for the future. Turned out that particular day was one of the couple's wedding anniversary exactly. Now, I didn't pick the day we went to Cana, knowing that. I just picked it because that would fit into the itinerary. And it was actually their wedding day. There were half a dozen things like that Sophia knew and that I didn't even know about until I read the book. Of things that happened on the trip that were coincidences and that just enhanced and made the trip so much more spiritual for us. So it was more than just a tour. As I said at the beginning, pilgrimages are more than a tour. They are not just sightseeing and going to places to learn and see them, but to experience and think what took place. One of the places that you usually stop is at the Mount of Olives, and you look at the city of Jerusalem across the Sidron Valley, and you see the dome of the rock, and you see the wall and the gate that is walled up that Christ walked through and rode through on the donkey on the first Palm Sunday. The gate's been boarded up ever since to prevent another Messiah from coming. Those sorts of things you don't get from movies and books and things. You have to go there and experience it. And another thing I'll just mention, from the Mount of Olives, you don't see it because everyone looks across the valley at the city. Immediately to your left, the entire hillside to the left of the road that Jesus came down on Palm Sunday is a huge, huge, huge Jewish cemetery. It covers the entire hillside, and it must be a mile wide and 3 miles long, with tens of thousands of graves, because all the Jews want to go back and be buried in Jerusalem for the second coming, or for the first coming of the Messiah. And it's I never knew that place existed until I got there.
Wow. And amazing to hear these stories, and amazing, of course, to have that experience, but really amazing to me too that a young girl, young lady, I suppose, really, at 17 years old, could write that powerful of a book to get that kind of reaction from you and from Bishop John Michael as well.
Yeah, she was great. Let me just give you a little anecdotal hint at her style of writing. Chapter 1, July 10. And I start reading the draft, the first one, and I said, wait a minute, this can't be right. Chapter 1, July 1 starts out with bzzzt, 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 bzzzt. The alarm went off. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. All our luggage was packed and already in the trunk of our car. All we had to do was shower, get dressed, and hit the road. We would grab breakfast at the first Dunkin' Donuts on the way. Origination, Bronx, New York. Interim destination, Dulles Airport, Washington, D.C. Final destination, Istanbul, Turkey. This day, July 10th, was a special day for me because it was my 17th birthday. And although I dreaded spending it in the car for a 4-hour ride and then on an airplane for a 10-hour flight, I was also excited to leave and visit new places. And that's how she starts the book. And when I saw the visit, it's a B with about 6 Z's and a T. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking to myself, what's she doing here? What is this? And then I read the first paragraph and she's visualizing for you the alarm going off.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It really puts you there, really puts you in her shoes, and really helps you paint a picture. And we haven't even left the United States yet, right?
No, that's right. But she hasn't left home yet. She's still up.
Right.
It's the Bronx, not Brooklyn. But yeah, she's still in the Bronx, and she's already got our attention. Even pilgrims on the trip that have now bought her book have told me they can't put it down. They start reading it and they get so enthralled with the way she tells the stories, and that they see and read about things they missed, that half a dozen of them have told me that they just keep reading and reading and reading and can't put it down.
Wow. Wow.
So I think it's actually, in my 30 years of book publishing, one of the best books I've ever done.
Wow. Wow, that very impressive. Well, we've been talking so much about this book, and I'm sure, especially with Lent coming up, a lot of people are looking for a book to read, maybe to help with their Lenten journey. This would probably make a great addition to that, especially with the walk through the Holy Land and a lot of those sites that we'll be uh, reading about as we journey to Pascha in the liturgy. Where would people be able to get a copy? That sort of what's the website again? Where would they be able to buy a copy?
Sure. It's just simply EC Pubs, which is short for Eastern Christian Publications. So ecpubs.com. And right on the homepage, in the bottom half, are our most recent publications, and it's the second to the most recent. The title again is That They May All Be One, which of course is the quote from the Gospel of John, and that is used by St. John Paul for his ecumenical document Ut Unum Sint. That's the Latin for That They May All Be One. She picked the title, and that's what she does is at the end of every day, she talks about how she herself is becoming an ecumenist, and how she is thinking and praying about how we should all be one. She started the trip not knowing anything about Eastern Orthodox churches, and all of a sudden she finds out from being on this trip how similar we are. So again, ecpubs.com is the homepage, or you can look under the new books tab, but it's right on the homepage. You just click on the book cover. It takes you to the page. You can buy one online. It's 280 pages, 300 plus color pictures, and because of all the pictures, it is I must admit perhaps a little pricey. It's $40, but that's what it costs to print.
Wow. Well, thank you again for sharing all of this information about this beautiful pilgrimage, about where people can find this book. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, because of all those color pictures, right, it is a little pricier of a book. But of course, as you mentioned, a lot of these pictures are documenting the Holy Land as it existed before this present conflict going on there in the Holy Land. So, from that perspective, right, quite an important work from that
Yeah.
aspect as
And,
well.
and if I could just throw a plug in from where we started, and that was pilgrimages. I am starting plans to do a pilgrimage in the year 2025, so next year, to Nicaea for the 17th anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council, and then probably connect visiting the Christian churches of Asia that we hear about in Revelation, and then a couple of days in Rome to make it an ecumenical trip to both Istanbul and Rome sometime in 2025. I haven't quite figured out what time of year is going to be the best, but I'm hoping to have a trip to commemorate the Council of Nicaea sometime in 2025.
Wow. So everyone look forward to that. Just judging from some of the stories you've told us, will be a very interesting and spiritually enriching experience. Jack, thanks again so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Father Deacon. God bless.
And thank you for tuning in to listen to us today, dialing us up on the podcast machines to listen to this week's episode of God with Us Live. I just wanted to take a second here at the end of our time together to mention the Faith Bucks program put together by God with Us. This is a way to kind of support the work we do here at God with Us, both this podcast as well as the webinars and the book publishing and all these other works we do to help enrich our Eastern Catholic faith here in the United States. So if you'd be interested in doing that, there's a lot of different levels. As the old saying goes, as simple as a cup of coffee a day. You can start out if you go to godwithusonline.org/faith-bucks. That's a way you can sponsor us. And of course, if you just go to the main page, godwithusonline.org, you'll also see the graphic there for Faith Bucks. You can click on that, and that's a way to make a small monthly donation, but every little bit helps. So once again, godwithusonline.org to check out Faithbucks and see if maybe that's something prayerfully you discern that God might be calling you to support this ministry in that way. Once again, thank you so much for listening to us today on God With Us Live. We'll see you again next week. God bless.
For this week's episode of God With Us Live. Make sure to tell a friend or two about us and subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to follow God With Us online on Facebook and Instagram for even more great content about the Eastern Catholic Churches. And don't forget to check out all the other great Eastern Catholic podcasts at godwithusradio.org, where faith meets life. God With Us Live is a production of God With Us Radio, hosted, produced, and edited by Nick Modelski. Send us a message at info@godwithusradio.org.